Nobody knew when he first appeared. He was just there one morning, sitting on a cold park bench in Chicago, barefoot, his little feet red from the freezing ground, a torn blanket wrapped around his shoulders. His hair, pale and soft, fell across a face that had forgotten how to smile. He didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't move. He only looked up at the grey sky, as if waiting for someone to answer a prayer too small for the wind to hear. When people asked where his parents were, he said the same thing every time, his voice trembling but certain. "My mom lives in heaven. She watches me from there." Most adults walked away. Some left a coin or a piece of bread. Others pretended they didn't see him. But every night he came back to that same bench, curled up beneath the same thin blanket, holding a broken backpack against his chest as if it were life itself. The city lights blinked above him, but he preferred the stars. They were closer to his mother, or so he believed. When hunger struck, he whispered, "I didn't eat today, Mom, but I still miss you." His words vanished into the cold, carried by a wind that had no mercy. No one knew his name. No one knew his story, yet every person who passed him felt something break quietly inside. He was so small, so alone, so forgotten. This is not a fairy tale. This is not a legend. This is the story of a real child, lost in a world too big for his heart. He was only 5 years old, and that cold park bench was the only place left on earth where he believed heaven could still see him. The park was still half asleep when the first light of dawn spilled over the frosted grass. Chicago looked quiet from afar, but up close it was a city that never really rested. A city that forgot to notice the small, the fragile, the lost. On that same bench near the fountain, Ethan sat wrapped in his blanket, watching the sky turn from black to silver. To him, sunrise wasn't just a new day, it was a message from heaven. Every color that appeared meant his mum was still looking. People hurried by, clutching coffee cups and cell phones, their breaths rising in clouds. None of them saw the tiny figure sitting still, his lips slightly purple, his eyes fixed on something far beyond the city. Sometimes he whispered words no one else could hear, as if telling the morning, "She's still watching me." The winter wind moved through the trees, scattering dry leaves like forgotten prayers. A guard named Mr. Gregg noticed him once, but thought maybe the boy had run away from home. He didn't know this park had already become the boy's whole world, the only place where Ethan could still dream without being hurt. That morning, across the path, a woman with grey hair and gentle eyes watered a row of frozen flowers. Her name was Miss Clara. She had no idea that her life was about to change forever, that this quiet, pale boy would soon fill the silence of her lonely home with something stronger than blood: love. If this story touches your heart, subscribe to Tears of an Abandoned Child. Give it a like and tell us in the comments what city or country you're watching from, because stories like this deserve to be heard, and love like this deserves to be seen. It was still dark when Mr. Gregg began his usual patrol around the park. The sound of his boots echoed across the empty paths, blending with the hum of streetlights that flickered above like tired stars. He had worked the night shift for years, had seen drunk men asleep on benches and stray dogs searching for scraps, but never a child. Not like this. The boy was sitting perfectly still, his feet dangling from the edge of the bench, wrapped in a torn blanket that barely reached his knees. Frost clung to his pale hair. For a moment, Mr. Gregg thought he was a doll someone had left behind, but then he saw the small chest rise and fall, slow and shallow, and the old man's heart sank. He approached carefully, afraid to scare him. "Hey, kid, are you lost?" The boy looked up. His eyes were impossibly blue, almost glowing in the dark. He didn't answer right away, just held a little backpack closer to his chest, a backpack torn at the seams with a child's drawing pinned to it. It showed a woman with long hair, smiling, a big red heart beside her. "My mom," he whispered finally, as if explaining everything at once. Mr. Gregg swallowed hard. "Where is she now?" he asked. The boy's lips trembled, but his voice was calm. "She lives in heaven. She watches me from there." The night guard had no reply. He knelt, opened his lunchbox, and pulled out a cookie. "Here, champ, you should eat something." The child took it with both hands, careful not to drop a single crumb, and whispered, "Thank you, sir." The sound of it felt like glass breaking inside Greg's chest. He looked around. No adults, no bags, no signs of anyone searching. The city beyond the park buzzed with life, but here, silence had weight. "Do you have anywhere to go?" the guard asked. The boy shook his head. "This is where my mom can see me best," he said, tilting his face toward the sky. For a long moment the old man stayed there, watching him chew slowly. He wanted to call someone, to take him somewhere safe, but something in the boy's gaze stopped him. It wasn't fear, it was faith, a fragile, sacred kind of faith he didn't want to break. "All right," Greg murmured. "I'll keep an eye on you tonight, okay?" The boy nodded, curling up again beneath his blanket. Mr. Gregg returned to his patrol, but every few minutes his flashlight found its way back to that bench. He couldn't help it. The image of that tiny figure under the dim light followed him like a prayer that refused to fade. When morning came, the park filled with people, and the boy vanished. Gregg searched around the fountains, behind the trees, near the kiosks. Nothing. It was as if he had dissolved with the mist. Only the drawing on the bench remained, fluttering in the wind. That night, when Gregg returned for his shift, the boy was there again, in the same place, in the same position, as if time had stood still. The old man felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. This wasn't just a lost child. This was something else. He didn't know it yet, but that fragile boy, Ethan, had come to change more than just one night. He would change lives, test hearts, and remind an entire city that even in the coldest corners, heaven sometimes sends someone to be seen. The next morning, the city woke to the sound of buses growling and pigeons scattering across the sky. The park looked different beneath the soft winter sun, still cold, still grey, but alive. In the middle of that quiet chaos, Ethan sat where he always did, his small frame swallowed by a blanket too thin for the season. He looked up at the clouds with sleepy eyes, as if waiting for them to form a message only he could read. From across the path, Miss Clara Reyes was tending to the flower beds near the fountain. She had been the park's gardener for almost 20 years. Her hands, rough and cracked, carried the memory of soil and rain. She had watched people change, trees grow, fountains crumble, and lovers age. But that morning, her eyes found something she'd never seen before. A boy sitting alone on a bench, motionless, as if time had forgotten him. At first, she thought maybe he belonged to someone nearby. But as the hours passed, the crowds shifted, and yet the boy remained. When she moved closer, she saw his bare feet peeking out from beneath the blanket, pale and red from the cold. Her heart tightened. No child should be sitting there like that. Not in this cold, not in this city. She approached slowly, not wanting to scare him. "Hey there, sweetheart," she said in a soft voice. "Are you waiting for someone?" The boy lifted his head. His eyes were an impossible shade of blue, deep, clear, and far too old for his small face. "My mom," he whispered. "She watches me from heaven." The words hit Miss Clara like a gust of wind. She didn't know what to say, so she just smiled sadly and crouched beside him. "Then she must be proud of you for being so brave," she replied. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small flower, a marigold she had saved from the last bloom of autumn. "Here," she said, placing it in his tiny hand. "This one's for her and for you." Ethan looked at it for a long time, as if it were the most beautiful thing in the world. Then he pressed it to his chest and nodded. "Thank you, Ma'am." Miss Clara felt a sting behind her eyes. There was something sacred in the way he held that fragile flower, like a prayer he didn't know how to say. She wanted to ask where he slept, what he ate, who took care of him, but she saw how easily questions could scare him. So instead she said, "I'll be here every morning, taking care of the flowers. You can come talk to them if you like." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. The image of the boy haunted her. The bare feet, the calm voice, the way he spoke of heaven as if it were next door. She tried to tell herself that someone would find him, that maybe his family would come back, but deep down she knew better. The following morning she packed an extra sandwich and a thermos of warm tea. When she arrived at the park, Ethan was already there, sitting on his bench, staring at the frozen pond. "Good morning, little one," she greeted. "I brought you something." He hesitated, but the smell of food softened his eyes. She poured a bit of tea into the cup and handed it to him carefully. "Be careful, it's hot," she said. He took it with both hands, blowing softly before sipping. The steam fogged his lashes. "It's sweet," he murmured. "It's how I drink it when I'm sad," Clara replied, sitting beside him. "Makes the cold feel a little less mean." They sat together in silence for a while, two souls from different worlds sharing the same patch of cold air. Around them, the park hummed quietly with life. Footsteps, distant laughter, the chirp of birds that hadn't flown south yet. But for Clara, all that faded into the background. All she could see was the boy beside her, and the quiet dignity with which he faced the world. When she left for the day, she turned back once more. Ethan was still there, holding the marigold in one hand and the cup in the other, his eyes fixed on the sky. That was the moment Miss Clara knew. Tomorrow she would bring more than food. She would bring warmth, not just for his body, but for his soul. The third morning came colder than the last. The city was wrapped in fog, and the trees of Lincoln Park stood like grey shadows. Ethan sat in his usual spot, his little hands tucked inside the sleeves of his torn sweater. His breath came out in small white clouds. He had barely slept. Every sound in the night, the sirens, the rustle of wind, had reminded him that he was still alone. Miss Clara arrived early, her scarf pulled tight and a paper bag clutched against her chest. She saw him right away and felt the same ache in her heart that she had felt since the first day. "Morning, sweetheart," she called softly. "I brought you something." She sat beside him and opened the bag. Inside were 2 small pieces of bread, still warm, and a cup of hot cocoa in a silver thermos. "Drink slowly," she said. "It's sweet." Ethan hesitated, his eyes darting between her and the cup. Then, with both hands trembling, he took it. The first sip made him close his eyes. Warmth slid down his throat like sunlight. For a moment, he didn't feel cold anymore. "It's good," he whispered. "It tastes like home." Clara smiled gently. "Home doesn't always have walls, my boy. Sometimes it's just someone who cares enough to keep you warm." He didn't answer. He just stared at the rising steam as if it carried his mother's voice. For a long moment, they sat there in silence, the kind of silence that doesn't hurt. It heals. Later, while Clara tended the flower beds, she noticed how Ethan followed her with his eyes. Every time she smiled, he tried to copy her expression, as if learning what comfort looked like. She started talking while she worked, telling him stories about her plants, the stubborn roses that bloomed even in winter, the tiny seed that waited months before daring to sprout. "Everything grows when it feels safe," she said. "Even hearts." When she finished, she walked over to him and offered her hand. "Come with me," she said softly. "You can sit by my stand while I work. It's warmer there." Ethan hesitated, clutching his blanket. He looked at her face, searching for any trace of danger. There was none, only kindness. So he nodded. Together they walked across the park. His little sandals slapped softly against the path, and his blanket dragged behind him like a small shadow. At her stand, Clara showed him her world. A wooden table covered in pots, watering cans, and tiny seedlings fighting to survive the winter. The smell of wet soil mixed with cinnamon from a nearby cafe. Ethan sat on a crate, clutching his cup, watching her move among the flowers as if she were caring for children. "You can help me if you want," she said. "The flowers like soft hands." He reached out, carefully touching a leaf. "It's cold," he said. "Yes," Clara smiled, "but it's alive. It just needs someone to care for it." As the morning went on, a few people stopped to buy plants. Some glanced at the boy but said nothing. Ethan shrank a little every time someone looked too long. Clara noticed and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Don't worry, my boy. You're safe here." When the day ended, she gave him a small potted flower. "For you," she said, "so you never forget that even the smallest things can grow again." Ethan held it against his chest like a treasure. "Can I keep it on my bench?" he asked. "You can keep it wherever you sleep," she answered softly. That evening, as the sun sank behind the skyline, Clara watched him walk back toward the fountain. He carried the flower carefully, like something sacred. She felt her throat tighten. No child should be walking into the night alone. Before she turned away, she whispered a promise to the wind. "Tomorrow, I'll make sure he never sleeps cold again." That night, as Ethan curled beneath his blanket, the little flower sat beside him, its petals trembling in the cold. He whispered, "Good night, Mom. I met someone nice today." Udom, and for the first time since his mother's absence, his small heart dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't invisible anymore. The next day, snow covered the city like a silent blanket. The air smelled of iron and smoke, and the park seemed frozen in time. The trees stood heavy with frost, their branches bending under the weight. Ethan sat on his bench, shivering beneath his torn blanket, clutching the flower Miss Clara had given him. Its petals were closing, trembling from the cold, just like him. Miss Clara arrived before dawn, her hands buried deep in her gloves, her breath a steady rhythm of determination. When she saw him, her eyes filled with tears that the wind quickly dried. "Sweetheart," she whispered, kneeling in front of him, "you'll get sick out here." Ethan looked up slowly, his lips pale. "It's okay," he said, voice small and tired. "Mom watches me from up there." He pointed to the sky, a sky so gray it almost swallowed the clouds. Clara took his hand. It was icy. She rubbed it gently between her palms, trying to warm life back into it. "Maybe she sent me, huh? Maybe she got tired of watching you freeze." For the first time, a small smile flickered across his lips. That was all the answer she needed. She stood up and took a deep breath. "Come on," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "You're coming with me." Ethan blinked. "To where?" "To my home," she replied. "Just for tonight, just to get warm." He hesitated. The world had taught him not to trust too quickly. He glanced at the park, the bench, the trees, the fountain, as if saying goodbye to everything he knew. Then he nodded. They walked slowly through the snow-covered path, Clara holding his tiny hand. He stumbled once, his little feet too cold to move, so she lifted him into her arms. He was light, far too light, and she could feel the bones through his coat. She pressed him against her chest and whispered, "You're safe now, my boy, you're safe." Her house wasn't big, just a one-story home near the edge of the neighborhood. The paint was chipped, the roof old, but it smelled of warmth and life. The moment she opened the door, a wave of heat and the scent of cinnamon greeted them. "Come in, sweetheart," she said softly. Ethan stepped inside as if entering a dream. He looked around cautiously. There was a small kitchen with plants hanging by the window, a table covered in colorful cloth, and pictures of flowers pinned to the walls. Everything was simple, but it felt alive. Clara poured him a cup of milk, warm and sweet, and handed it to him. He drank it slowly, his fingers gripping the mug like it might vanish. "You can stay here tonight," she said. "Tomorrow, we'll see what we can do." Ethan glanced at the floor. "I don't want to be trouble." "You're not trouble," she said gently. "You're a blessing I didn't know I needed." When he finished the milk, she led him to a small bed she had made beside her own. A thick quilt, freshly washed sheets, and a tiny stuffed bear that had belonged to her grandson. "This is yours for now," she said. "You rest, and tomorrow we'll find you new clothes, okay?" He sat on the edge of the bed, unsure what to do. "It's soft," he whispered. "That's what beds are supposed to be," Clara said with a smile. "They hug you while you sleep." He climbed under the quilt slowly, afraid it might not be real. When she turned off the light, he whispered, "Miss Clara." "Yes, honey." "Can you tell Mom I'm warm now?" She swallowed hard and answered, "She already knows." Outside, the snow fell heavier, covering the city in white silence. Inside, a new kind of warmth began to grow, quiet, fragile, but alive. Miss Clara sat on the edge of her bed long after Ethan had fallen asleep. His breathing was soft and even, his face finally peaceful. She watched him for a while, whispering a prayer to whoever might be listening. "Thank you for sending him," she murmured. "I promise I'll take care of him." And as dawn crept through the curtains, for the first time in years, her house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like home. Morning came quietly, filtered through the thin curtains like golden dust. The old clock on the wall ticked softly, while the smell of toasted bread drifted from the kitchen. Miss Clara moved gently around the stove, afraid to wake him too soon. She glanced toward the small bed by her own and saw the boy still sleeping, one arm hanging loose from beneath the blanket, the stuffed bear tucked beneath his chin. For the first time since she had brought him home, she allowed herself to breathe fully. Ethan stirred when the floor creaked. His eyes blinked open, slow and cautious, unsure if the warmth around him was real or another dream. He sat up, his hair messy, and whispered, "Where am I?" "You're home, at least for now," Clara said from the doorway with a smile. "Good morning, sweetheart. You must be hungry." He rubbed his eyes and nodded. "I'm always hungry," he murmured, embarrassed. Clara's heart cracked a little. "Then today we fix that." She led him to the table, where she had laid out a small feast, scrambled eggs, bread with butter, and a cup of warm milk sprinkled with cinnamon. Ethan climbed onto the chair carefully, as if afraid it might break beneath him. "You can eat all you want," she said, placing the fork in his hand. He hesitated for just a second before taking a bite, then another, and another. The sound of his quiet chewing filled the silence. When he looked up, his eyes met hers. "It's good," he whispered. "It's not the best breakfast in the world," Clara said, pretending to frown, "but it's made with love." He looked at her seriously. "That's why it's good." Clara turned away quickly, pretending to check the kettle, but her eyes shimmered. She didn't want him to see her cry. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to her with such simple truth. After breakfast, she gave him a small towel and pointed toward the bathroom. "There's warm water in the bucket. You can wash up and put these on." She held up clean clothes, too big but freshly washed. Ethan disappeared into the bathroom, and minutes later, she heard the sound of splashing water and a soft hum. When he came out, his pale hair was damp, his cheeks pink from warmth. The sweater hung loose on him, the sleeves swallowing his hands, but his small smile made him look like a different child. "You look handsome," Clara said, "like a little gentleman." He grinned shyly and whispered, "Mom used to say that too." She walked over, kneeling to his level. "Then I guess she and I agree on something important." She brushed his hair aside and saw his faint dimples when he smiled again. It was small, hesitant, but real, the first one she had seen. Later that day, they sat together in the backyard garden. The air smelled of soil and pine, and sunlight spilled between the wooden slats of the fence. Clara handed him a tiny shovel. "Want to help me replant these?" she asked. Ethan nodded eagerly. His small fingers pressed into the dirt, and when the first flower stood upright, he clapped his hands softly. "It's alive again," he said, his voice bright with wonder. "Yes," she smiled. "Everything that gets a little love finds a way to live again." They spent hours like that, planting, watering, laughing quietly. Ethan forgot about the park, the hunger, the empty nights. He only knew the sound of Clara's voice and the warmth of the sun on his back. As evening fell, she made hot soup for dinner. They ate together at the small wooden table, the radio humming faintly in the background. When Ethan finished his bowl, he leaned his head against his arm and yawned. "Can I stay tomorrow too?" he asked softly. Clara reached over and touched his hair. "You can stay as long as you need, my boy." That night she tucked him into bed again. Before turning off the light, he looked up at her and said, "Miss Clara?" "Yes, sweetheart?" "I think Mom sent you to me." Her breath caught. "Maybe she did," she whispered. "Then I don't feel so alone anymore," he murmured, closing his eyes. Clara stood in the doorway watching him sleep. His chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, his face calm, peaceful. A single tear slipped down her cheek, one of gratitude, not sorrow. For years, her home had been filled only with silence and the sound of her radio. Now it held the soft breathing of a child who had forgotten how to smile. And that night, as snow fell softly outside, Miss Clara whispered into the dark, "Thank you, God, for giving me a reason to wake up again." Days began to blend into gentle routines. Morning sunlight, the sound of birds near the window, the smell of warm milk and cinnamon. Ethan had started to hum while helping Miss Clara water the flowers. His laughter, still soft and shy, filled the house in ways the old woman never thought she would hear again. Every small sound of joy from him felt like a thread sewing her heart back together. Clara kept everything calm. She never asked too much, never pushed for stories about before. She knew the look in his eyes when he heard a siren outside or when a door slammed too hard, how his little body tensed as if expecting something terrible. She just kept offering kindness, letting him rediscover what safety felt like. One afternoon, the wind was strong, shaking the tiny pots in the backyard. They were both sitting by the window table, surrounded by drawings and soil-stained notebooks. Clara had given him an old sketchpad she once used to plan her garden designs. Ethan now filled its pages with simple doodles, suns, trees, stick figures holding hands. "Do you like drawing?" Clara asked, watching his small hand move carefully across the paper. "Yes," he said, eyes focused. "Mom used to draw with me." Her chest tightened, but she kept her voice light. "What did you two draw?" "Mostly bread," he said with a tiny smile. "She baked all the time. I'd draw the bread while she made it. We called it our magic bread." "That sounds wonderful," Clara said. "She must have been very kind." "She was," he whispered. Then he grew quiet again. He flipped to a clean page. "Can I draw her?" "Of course you can," Clara replied. Ethan took his time. His tongue peeked from the corner of his mouth as he drew a woman with a long braid and a big smile, holding something that looked like bread in her hands. When he finished, he held up the paper proudly. "That's her." Clara's throat felt tight. "She's beautiful," she said softly. "What was her name?" The boy stared at the picture, his brow furrowing. He pressed his lips together, searching his memory like someone walking through fog. Her name was... He stopped. Then quietly, I think she called herself Anna Scott. And your name, sweetheart? Clara asked gently. Do you remember your last name? He hesitated again, then whispered, Ethan. Ethan Scott. I think that's right. The words hung in the air, fragile but powerful. It was the first time he had said his full name since she'd met him. Clara smiled, brushing a stray hair from his forehead. That's a good name, strong, just like you. He looked up at her. Do you think she still remembers me? Oh, my love, Clara said softly. A mother never forgets, not even in heaven. That night, after Ethan fell asleep, Clara sat alone at the kitchen table with the sketchbook. She stared at the drawing of the smiling woman and traced the name Anna Scott with her fingertip. She felt something stirred deep in her chest, a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. She pulled an old radio closer, tuning into the local station. The static filled the kitchen until a voice broke through. Good evening, Chicago. If you've lost someone, if you're looking for someone, call us. Maybe someone's listening. Clara grabbed a notepad and a pen. Her hand shook as she wrote, Lost child, around 5 years old, pale hair, blue eyes. His name might be Ethan Scott. Please, if anyone knows anything, call this number. She read it twice, then folded the note neatly. Tomorrow, she would make the call. She didn't know what would come of it, maybe nothing, but she couldn't ignore the feeling that someone out there was still missing this little boy. Before going to bed, she checked on Ethan one last time. He was curled up under the quilt, the stuffed bear pressed against his chest, the faintest smile on his lips. Clara leaned down and whispered, Good night, Ethan Scott. You're home now, and tomorrow we'll find out where you came from. The lamp flickered softly as she turned it off. Outside, snowflakes drifted past the window like quiet blessings, and inside, for the first time, both hearts dreamed without fear. The next morning dawned sharp and bright, the kind of cold that bit through gloves and whispered around window seams. Miss Clara stood in the kitchen, staring at the scrap of paper she had written the night before, the note for the radio station. It looked so small and helpless against the weight of what it might mean. Ethan still slept curled beneath the quilt, his hair spilling over the pillow like white silk. She didn't want to wake him, so she slipped out quietly, wrapping her coat tight. The streets were slick with frost, buses breathing clouds of smoke as they passed. At the corner newsstand, the vendor greeted her with a nod. Cold one today, he said. Too cold for children to be outside, she replied. Inside the radio building, the receptionist looked surprised to see an elderly gardener at the counter holding a handwritten note. Ma'am, you can leave your message here, the woman said kindly. Clara handed it over, her hands shaking. Please, she whispered, read it soon. When she returned home, Ethan was sitting at the kitchen table, coloring quietly. Where did you go? He asked. To run an errand, she said with a smile. Nothing important, but to her it was everything. 3 days passed. The city moved as if nothing had changed, yet inside their small house time felt heavier. Every evening she turned the radio on, listening to the news, waiting for a voice to read her message. Ethan didn't know what she had done. She didn't want to raise hopes she couldn't keep. On the third night, as they ate soup together, the radio announcer spoke. A message from a listener. Missing child, approximately 5 years old, pale hair, blue eyes, name possibly Ethan Scott. If anyone has information, please contact this station. Clara froze, spoon halfway to her mouth. Ethan looked up. That's my name, he said softly. Her heart pounded. Yes, she answered carefully. Maybe someone out there will know something. He frowned. Will they take me away? She reached across the table and covered his small hand. No one's taking you anywhere, sweetheart. You're safe here. After dinner, he helped her wash the dishes. humming a tune he said his mother used to sing. The sound filled the house with a strange peace. When he finished, he looked at her and asked, "Do you think she can hear me when I sing?" Clara smiled. "I think she can hear you louder than anyone." That night, Ethan slept soundly. For the first time in weeks, there were no nightmares, no whispers of fear, just slow breathing and a tiny hand resting over the stuffed bear. Clara sat by the window, staring at the radio. She didn't know whether she had done the right thing. The thought of losing him made her chest ache, yet she also knew she couldn't keep his past locked away. Every child deserved to be known, to have a name, to belong. She reached for her cup of tea, its warmth fading fast. "Please, God," she murmured, "if someone's meant to find him, let it be the right person. Let it be someone who will love him as much as I do." Outside, the wind swept through the narrow streets, carrying faint echoes of a voice that had finally spoken his name to the world. And though she didn't yet know it, that single broadcast had already set a quiet chain of events in motion, one that would soon test her courage, her faith, and the promise she had made on that snowy morning. He will never sleep cold again. It was a pale afternoon in February, the kind that made the city look almost colorless. Miss Clara and Ethan were walking back from the market, their arms full of groceries and laughter. The boy carried a loaf of bread wrapped in paper, holding it like treasure. For weeks, things had been peaceful, too peaceful, perhaps. The radio announcement had gone quiet, and no one had called. Life had settled into a gentle rhythm that both had come to depend on. They crossed the street near the park entrance, the same place where Ethan had once slept under the cold. He looked at it with a strange calm, as if seeing it for the first time as something that no longer belonged to him. "That's where I used to talk to Mom," he said. "When the lights came on, I thought she could see me better." Clara smiled, brushing his hair from his face. "She can still see you, sweetheart, but now she sees you warm, not shivering." They were about to cross the next block when Clara noticed a woman standing across the street. Her hair was dark and pulled back, her coat expensive but wrinkled, her eyes swollen as if she hadn't slept. She was staring straight at them. At first, Clara thought it was coincidence, just a passerby. But then the woman's expression changed. She froze, her hand trembling over her mouth. Ethan noticed too. He stopped walking, the color drained from his face. "Miss Clara," he whispered, clutching her sleeve. "That's her." Clara turned, startled. "Who, sweetheart?" "The one who used to yell." His voice was almost a breath. Before Clara could respond, the woman took a hesitant step forward, her eyes brimming with tears. "Ethan," she called out. Her voice cracked in the middle of his name. The world around them seemed to fade. Cars honked, people passed, but none of it existed for those three souls caught in that single moment. Ethan's small hand gripped Clara's tighter. He shook his head violently. "Don't let her take me," he pleaded. "Please." Clara's pulse pounded in her ears. She placed herself between them, her body a silent shield. "It's okay, honey. You're safe," she whispered. Across the street, the woman stopped. She didn't approach. She just stared, her eyes glassy, her face a mix of disbelief and guilt. For a moment, Clara thought she might cry out or rush forward, but instead she turned abruptly and disappeared into the crowd. When she was gone, Ethan collapsed against Clara, trembling. She knelt and held him close, feeling his tiny heart thudding against her chest. "You're safe," she repeated. "No one's going to hurt you, I promise." They stayed like that for several minutes, the noise of the city rushing around them like water around a rock. When they finally walked home, Ethan was silent. His face was pale, his eyes distant, the same eyes she had seen when they first met in the park. That night he didn't eat, he didn't speak, he just sat by the window staring at the sky. Clara brought him his favorite cocoa, but he barely touched it. "She's not gone," he whispered. "She'll come back. Then we'll be ready," Clara said, kneeling beside him. "You don't have to be afraid anymore." He turned his face toward her, tears welling up but refusing to fall. "Miss Clara, if she finds me, will you still want me?" The question broke her heart clean in two. She gathered him into her arms. "Ethan, listen to me. You are my boy now. Nothing changes that." He nodded weakly, burying his face in her shoulder. For the rest of the night, she kept her arm around him until he finally fell asleep. When morning came, the world looked the same, but Clara's heart knew it wasn't. The woman's face haunted her, that strange mix of recognition and guilt. It wasn't the look of a stranger. It was the look of someone who had lost something and didn't know how to ask for it back. As she stood by the window watching the snow melt into muddy water, Clara whispered to herself, "Whoever you are, please, don't hurt him again." But deep down, she knew this wasn't over. The past had found its way back, and soon it would come knocking on her door. The days that followed were heavy, like clouds about to burst. Ethan stayed close to Miss Clara, rarely letting go of her hand when they walked outside. He flinched at loud sounds, avoided strangers, and stopped smiling. The light that had begun to return to his eyes dimmed again, replaced by a quiet fear. Miss Clara didn't push him to talk. She knew pain had its own language, one spoken through silence, through trembling fingers, through the way a child clings to your sleeve when the world feels unsafe. But one afternoon, as they cleaned the little storage shed behind the house, that silence broke. She had opened an old wooden chest filled with photographs, yellowed papers, and forgotten trinkets. Ethan knelt beside her, curious. He picked up a picture, a young woman standing by a lake, her hair tied in a braid, wearing a long white dress. His fingers froze. The color drained from his face. The photograph slipped from his hands. "Sweetheart?" Clara asked softly, kneeling beside him. "What's wrong?" He shook his head, but his lips quivered. "That dress. It looks like hers." "Whose, honey?" "The one from the park. The woman who yelled." Clara's chest tightened. "You mean the woman we saw last week?" Ethan nodded. His voice turned into a whisper. "She used to lock me in a room. When I cried, she'd say it was my fault Mum didn't come back." Clara froze. Every muscle in her body went cold. "Your mum?" He nodded again. "The nice one. She died. The other woman married my dad after. But when he went away, she didn't like me anymore. She said I made the house dirty. She'd put me in the dark. I was scared." His small voice cracked. The words came out between shaky breaths. "One night, I ran. I thought Mom could see me from the sky. I just wanted her to find me." Clara pulled him into her arms. He clung to her tightly, his tears soaking her sweater. "You're safe now," she whispered, rocking him gently. "No one will ever put you in the dark again, I promise." That night, after he fell asleep, Clara sat by the window with her tea untouched. She now understood why the woman had looked at Ethan with that mixture of shock and guilt. She wasn't his mother, at least not the one he spoke to when he looked at the sky. She was something else, a wound, a shadow. Clara's thoughts spun in circles. Should she tell the police? Should she confront the woman? Should she do nothing and keep Ethan hidden forever? The law didn't care about love. She knew that. Paperwork didn't see bruises on the heart. She went to her old tin box and pulled out the documents she had gathered from the social office. Flyers, contact cards, forms. She scanned every line, searching for anything about a missing boy named Ethan Scott. Nothing. No file. No report. As if he had never existed. Her throat tightened. "Invisible," she murmured. He was invisible to them all. She looked at him sleeping, his little hand gripping the stuffed bear, his breathing soft and even. "Not anymore," she said aloud. "Not while I'm alive." The next morning, she sold every plant she had at her stall, saving the money in a tin jar. With that, she would buy him shoes, a real jacket, and a notebook for school. and if the world ever tried to take him again, she would fight it, not with words, but with proof that love had already chosen him. Outside, the first rays of sunlight broke through the grey sky. Ethan stirred in his sleep, murmuring softly, "Mom!" Clara smiled faintly, brushing his hair back. "She's watching, my boy," she whispered, "but I'm watching too." For the first time, she wasn't afraid of the past. She was ready to face it, because Ethan had brought something stronger into her life than fear. He had brought truth, and love, when it's real, doesn't hide from the light. Saturday afternoon arrived with a wind that rattled the windows and bent the thin trees outside. Miss Clara was trimming the last dry leaves from her geraniums, while Ethan played with a cardboard box in the living room, pretending it was a ship. The radio hummed softly in the background, a familiar comfort. Then came the knock, 3 quick firm raps that broke the calm like glass. Her hands froze. Something in that sound felt official, practiced. She wiped the dirt from her palms and went to the door. Through the curtain she saw 3 figures. A young woman in a neat blazer holding a folder, a man in a dark coat with an ID badge, and behind them, the woman from the street. Clara's heartbeat turned heavy. She opened the door halfway. "Good afternoon." "Mrs. Clara Reyes?" the man asked. "Yes. We're with the Department of Child and Family Services. We received an anonymous report concerning a minor residing here without legal guardianship." Clara's throat tightened. "He was alone in a park, freezing. I only gave him shelter." Before the man could respond, the woman behind him spoke, voice trembling. "Ethan, honey, it's me." She removed her sunglasses. Her eyes were red, her face pale. Inside, Ethan peeked around the corner. The moment he saw her, his small body stiffened. The color drained from his cheeks. "No," he whispered. "No, no." He ran to Clara and clutched her arm. "Don't let her take me," he pleaded. Clara crouched beside him. "You're safe," she murmured, though fear rippled through her. She faced the officials. "That woman is not fit to have him. He was terrified when he saw her." The caseworker sighed. "Ma'am, if she's the biological guardian, we're required to verify custody. The court will decide." Ethan stepped forward, shaking. "She's not my mom," he said, voice cracking. "My mom's in heaven. She used to sing. This lady yelled. She locked me in the dark." The room fell silent. Even the ticking clock seemed to stop. The woman's lips parted, but no words came out. The man from the department wrote something down, his expression tight. Clara put her arms around the boy, shielding him. "You're not taking him tonight," she said quietly. "He's safe here, and that's what matters." The caseworker hesitated, then nodded slowly. "We'll schedule an evaluation. No removals until a judge reviews it." When the door finally closed, Clara locked it and leaned her forehead against the wood. Her legs felt weak. Behind her, Ethan stood silent, staring at the floor. "She'll come back," he said. "Then we'll be ready," Clara whispered, pulling him close. "You've got someone to fight for you now." That night, sleep refused to come. She watched the shadows crawl across the ceiling, listening for footsteps that never came. The law was on the woman's side, she knew, but truth was on theirs. She would gather witnesses. Every person who had ever seen that child alone in the park. She would speak until someone listened. In the next room, Ethan finally drifted off, his small hand gripping the stuffed bear tight. Each breath he took sounded like a fragile promise in the dark. Clara whispered into the silence, "You'll never be invisible again, my boy. Not while I have a voice." Outside, the wind howled across the empty street, but inside that little house, 2 hearts stood ready for the fight that love demands. The following morning, Chicago's grey sky hung low, as if the clouds themselves carried Clara's worries. She hadn't slept. Each sound in the night had felt like a warning. The rattle of the gate, the creak of the floor, even the soft sighs from Ethan's room. She had spent those hours sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of papers left by the caseworker. Temporary investigation, they said. But to her, it read like a countdown. When Ethan woke, he found her there, still in the same chair, a cup of cold coffee by her side. "Are they coming today?" he asked quietly. "Not today, sweetheart," she said, forcing a smile. "But they'll come again. And when they do, we'll tell them the truth." He nodded, though his eyes were still clouded with fear. He followed her everywhere that day, from the garden to the market, and even to the neighbor's porch. He didn't want to let go of her hand, not even for a second. That afternoon, Clara went to the community center, gripping Ethan's little drawings in her purse like evidence. The social worker there, a young woman named Alicia, listened patiently as Clara spoke, how she'd found the boy alone, how he'd slept in the park for weeks, how no one had looked for him until now. When Clara's voice cracked, Alicia put a gentle hand on her arm. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the law moves slower than love, but if you can show that he's safe and cared for, you might get temporary custody until the case is reviewed." Clara's heart beat faster. "What do I need?" "Proof," Alicia replied. "Statements, witnesses, anyone who saw him before you took him in." That night, Clara went back to the park. The air was freezing, the fountain covered in thin ice. She found the old night guard, Mr. Gregg, standing near his post with a thermos in hand. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Miss Clara, haven't seen you in weeks." She told him everything, the officials, the woman, the fear. Gregg listened in silence, nodding slowly. "I remember that boy," he said finally. "Came here every night, never saw a parent, just him and that little blanket." "Would you write that down?" Clara asked. "A statement, anything." He nodded without hesitation. "Of course. That kid, he deserves better." The next day, she visited the food vendors near the park gates. One woman remembered giving the boy pieces of bread. Another had seen him sleeping behind the kiosk. Each one agreed to sign something, to tell the truth if asked. The more she gathered, the lighter her chest felt, as if she was slowly building a wall strong enough to protect him. Back home, Ethan was drawing again. His new pictures were different now: gardens, bright skies, and two figures holding hands. At the bottom, in shaky letters, he had written, "Me and my new mom." When Clara saw it, her heart trembled. "You keep that safe," she said, kissing the top of his head. "It's the most important proof we have." "Proof of what?" he asked. "That love can be stronger than paper," she answered. Over the next few days, the house filled with whispers of hope and fear. Clara practiced what she would say in court, her voice steady in the mirror. Ethan helped her by placing his hand over hers whenever she trembled. "We're a team," he said once proudly. She smiled through tears. "Yes, we are." But at night, when he was asleep, she still checked the locks twice. She still watched the shadows. Because even when love gives you courage, fear doesn't vanish. It just learns to stand behind you instead of in front. By the end of the week, she had everything ready: letters, signatures, and a heart that refused to give up. She looked at Ethan's sleeping face one last time before turning off the light. "Tomorrow we start the fight," she whispered, "and this time, my boy, the world is going to hear your story." The day of the hearing arrived heavy with rain. The courthouse rose grey and cold against the skyline, its windows glinting like eyes that saw too much. Miss Clara held Ethan's hand as they stepped through the doors. His fingers were clammy, small, trembling inside her grasp. Inside, everything smelled of polish and paper. Voices murmured, heels clicked on tile, and the air carried the nervous pulse of people waiting to be judged. A social worker guided them to a hallway bench. "You'll both be called soon," she said kindly. Ethan pressed close to Clara's arm. "Do I have to talk?" he asked. "Only if they ask you questions," she whispered. "Just tell the truth. The truth is brave." He nodded, though his lower lip quivered. When his name echoed through the corridor, his small shoulders stiffened. "Ethan Scott, please." A woman in a blue dress smiled gently and led him into the room. Clara stayed outside, clutching her purse like a shield. Each second felt longer than a lifetime. Inside, Ethan sat on a large chair, his feet not reaching the floor. Across from him, the judge leaned forward kindly. "How are you today, young man?" "Okay," Ethan whispered. "I just need to ask a few things. You live with Miss Clara, yes?" He nodded. "Do you like living there?" Ethan hesitated, then smiled a little. "It's warm there, and she makes pancakes with chocolate chips." The courtroom smiled softly. The judge's tone remained calm. "Do you know the woman who came to visit before?" Ethan's face changed. The light in his eyes dimmed. "Yes." "Who is she?" "She married my dad after my mom went to heaven. She yelled a lot." The judge's pen stilled. "Did she ever hurt you, Ethan?" The boy's voice came small, almost invisible. "She locked me in the dark when I cried, said I was bad." The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. The social worker wiped her eyes quietly. The judge leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Thank you, Ethan. You did very well. You can wait outside now." When he came out, Clara knelt to his level. His eyes were red, his hands shaking. "You were so brave," she whispered, pulling him into her arms. "So very brave." "I told the truth," he said. "Just like you said." Moments later, Clara was called in. She sat before the judge with her back straight and her heart pounding. She told everything: the night she found him, the mornings she fed him, the nightmares she calmed, the drawings he made of gardens and stars. She spoke with no papers in her hands, only conviction in her voice. "Ma'am," the judge asked gently, "why did you take him in?" Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Because no one else did." For a long moment no one spoke. Then the judge nodded slowly. "Thank you, Miss Reyes. We will review all testimony and issue our decision in 72 hours. Until then, the boy will remain under your care." As she left the courtroom, rain tapped softly on the tall windows. Ethan waited in the hallway, clutching his stuffed bear. She reached for his hand, and he looked up with fragile hope. "Did we win?" he asked. "Not yet," she said with a trembling smile, "but we didn't lose either." Outside, the rain had slowed to a mist. They walked home through puddles reflecting the grey sky. For the first time in days, Clara felt a quiet strength rise within her. The truth had finally been spoken, not by lawyers or officials, but by a child who had learned that his voice mattered. That night she tucked him into bed, whispering, "Sleep, my boy. You were the bravest soul in that room." Ethan's eyelids fluttered. "Does brave mean not scared?" "No," she said softly. "It means scared, but speaking anyway." He smiled faintly before drifting off, and Clara sat beside him long after, listening to the steady rhythm of his breath, the sound of courage learning to rest. The next 3 days stretched longer than any winter Clara had ever lived through. Each morning began with the same weight in her chest, the same prayer whispered into her coffee cup. "Please, let love be enough." Outside, Chicago thawed slowly. Slush replaced snow, puddles gathered at the corners of cracked sidewalks. But inside that little house, time seemed frozen. Every tick of the wall clock sounded like a verdict crawling closer. Ethan tried to stay brave. He played with the cardboard box that had become his ship, drew pictures of gardens and suns, and asked every few hours, "Do we know yet?" Clara always smiled and said, "Not yet, sweetheart," even when her stomach twisted at the thought of the envelope that would arrive any day. On the second night, the phone rang once. and then stopped. She almost collapsed from the shock of that single sound. It wasn't the court, it was only a wrong number, but the tremor in her hands lasted until dawn. By the third day, the house was spotless. She had cleaned it twice over just to keep moving. She baked bread to calm her nerves, filling the rooms with warmth. Ethan helped, his small fingers pressing the dough flat, leaving tiny handprints that made her smile through tears. "If they come," he said, "will they take me away?" "No," she answered, kneeling to meet his eyes. "Not while I can still breathe." That afternoon, thunder rolled far off, echoing across the city. Clara sat by the window with Ethan beside her, both of them watching the rain. A white van slowed in front of the house and her breath stopped, but it only delivered mail down the block and drove away. When evening finally came, she lit a candle on the kitchen table. "For peace," she told him, "and for truth." They ate soup in silence, the candle's flame dancing between them. She looked at him, this small boy who had once been a ghost in a park, and thought, whatever happens, he will never be invisible again. Before bed, Ethan handed her a drawing. It showed two stick figures under a roof, smiling. Beneath it, in shaky letters, he had written, "Me and Miss Clara, home." Tears blurred her vision. She kissed his forehead and tucked him under the quilt. Outside, the storm eased. The candle's flame trembled once and went out. Somewhere in the city, papers were being signed, seals pressed, decisions made by hands that would never know how much love had filled that tiny house. And while Clara didn't yet have the answer, she finally realized something. Win or lose, she had already done what mattered most. She had given him a home, a name, and the courage to believe he belonged. When sleep finally came, she dreamed not of judges or papers, but of a garden in full bloom and a little boy running through it barefoot, laughing beneath a sky that no longer looked grey. On the morning of the fourth day, the city was still. A faint mist clung to the streets, the kind that blurred the edges of everything. Miss Clara stood at the window, her apron still dusted with flour, watching for any sign of the mail truck. Her heart felt like a clock wound too tight. Every sound outside, a door slamming, a dog barking, made her jump. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, drawing again. This time, he drew the park where they had met. The fountain, the bench, the trees, and a tiny figure wrapped in a blanket. Beside him, another figure, her. "That's you," he said, smiling faintly. "The lady who found me." Clara knelt beside him, brushing his white hair away from his forehead. "And that's you," she said softly. "The boy who found me back." At noon, the rumble of a van stopped in front of the house. She froze. Through the lace curtain, she saw the white government vehicle with the blue emblem on its side. Her breath caught as a young woman stepped out, holding a manila envelope. She opened the door before the knock came. "Mrs. Reyes?" the woman asked. "Yes," Clara said, her voice trembling. "I have the court's decision." Clara led her inside, the sound of her heartbeat louder than her footsteps. Ethan stood near the table, clutching his stuffed bear. The caseworker opened the envelope slowly, reading from the paper inside. After reviewing testimonies, witness statements, and the psychological evaluation of the minor Ethan Scott, the court finds that the child's emotional and physical well-being are being met in an exceptional manner under the care of Miss Clara Reyes. Therefore, temporary custody is to be extended, with recommendation for permanent adoption. The words hung in the air like light breaking through clouds. For a heartbeat, Clara couldn't move. Her knees weakened, her hand flying to her mouth as tears spilled freely. Ethan looked between them, confused. "What does it mean?" he asked. The caseworker smiled softly. "It means you get to stay right here, sweetheart." He dropped his bear and ran into Clara's arms. She lifted him, holding him close, crying openly now. "You're home," she whispered. "You're really home." The woman handed her the papers, then quietly excused herself, leaving them alone in the quiet house. Outside, the van drove away, tires splashing through puddles. Inside, laughter and sobs mingled in the air. Neighbors, who had heard the good news through the grapevine, began to knock on her door throughout the afternoon. One brought a box of crayons. Another brought clothes, notebooks, even a pair of bright blue sneakers. "We heard," said Mrs. Lopez from across the street. "That boy deserves a new start." By evening, the small house smelled of baked bread and joy. Ethan sat on the floor coloring, while Clara folded the official papers carefully and placed them inside the family Bible. She traced the word adoption with her finger and whispered, "Thank you." Later that night, they stood in the backyard under a silver sky. Ethan pointed upward, his breath forming tiny clouds. "Do you think my mom can see me now?" Clara smiled, her eyes glistening. "Oh yes, my boy. She's smiling so wide the stars can't hide it." He reached for her hand. "Then I'll tell her something." "What's that?" "That I found another mum down here." She pulled him close, pressing her forehead to his. "And she found her son." The garden rustled gently in the night breeze. The world had finally made room for them, two souls stitched together by chance, sealed by love. The past no longer owned them, the papers no longer defined them. What mattered was right there, warmth, belonging, and the soft rhythm of two hearts finally beating in the same home. And as the stars shimmered over the quiet street, Clara whispered to the heavens, "You can rest now, Anna. He's safe, I promise." Spring came slowly to Chicago that year. The snow melted into clear puddles that reflected the morning light, and the park, the same one where it had all begun, bloomed with color again. Ethan, now dressed in his new blue sneakers, ran down the path with a laugh that echoed like music between the trees. Miss Clara followed behind him, her steps slower but lighter than they'd been in years. "Careful, sweetheart," she called, pretending to scold. "I'm fine," he shouted, spinning around. "Look, the bench." He ran to it, the same cold bench where he'd once slept alone, where the stars had been his only friends. He touched the wood gently, as if greeting an old ghost. Then he turned and smiled. "It's not sad anymore," he said. "It feels like it's saying goodbye." Clara felt tears rise, but this time they were soft, full of peace. "Then let's say goodbye properly," she said. Together, they placed a small pot of flowers on the bench, bright marigolds, the same kind she had once given him. Ethan brushed a stray petal with his finger. "These are for Mom," he whispered. "She used to like the orange ones best." They sat there for a long while, listening to the birds and the distant sounds of the city. The wind carried the smell of wet earth and new life. Clara looked at him, his pale hair glinting under the sunlight, his cheeks full of color. It was hard to believe he was the same child who had once shivered through nights of hunger and fear. When they left the park, they stopped by the market. Vendors greeted them with smiles and warm bread. "That's the boy," said one of them softly, watching Ethan laugh. "The one who used to be lost." "Not anymore," another answered. "He's home now." At home, the house was filled with sunlight. The garden outside burst with new blooms, tiny white daisies, tulips, and the first shoots of roses. Ethan helped water them, careful not to spill. "Do flowers grow better when we talk to them?" he asked. "Always," Clara said. "Love makes everything grow stronger." He nodded, then added in his small, serious voice, "That's what happened to me." That evening, as the sun dipped low, Clara helped him with his new school backpack. His name was written neatly on the tag, Ethan Scott Reyes. He traced the letters with his finger, smiling. "Now I have a real name," he said proudly. "You always did," Clara replied. "We just had to help the world see it." After dinner, they sat together on the porch, watching the sky shift from orange to blue. The first stars appeared one by one. Ethan tilted his head back, eyes bright. "Do you think Mom's up there right now?" "I do," Clara said. "What do you think she's doing?" "Watching us," she answered, "and maybe laughing a little because she knows you're safe." Ethan leaned against her shoulder, the rhythm of his small heartbeat steady against her side. "Then I'm happy," he murmured, "because she's not sad anymore." The air grew cooler, and Clara wrapped an old blanket around them both, the same one he had once used to survive the cold. Now it smelled of lavender and warmth. Together, they watched the sky until his eyes began to close. As she carried him inside, she looked back once more at the stars. "Thank you," she whispered, "for sending him to me." She laid him gently in his bed. He was already half asleep, one hand clutching the little stuffed bear. She tucked the blanket under his chin and brushed a kiss across his forehead. And for the first time in his young life, Ethan slept without dreaming of cold benches or empty skies. He dreamed of gardens, laughter, and hands that never let go. He had found what he'd always been looking for, heaven not above the clouds, but here on earth, in the arms of someone who chose to love him. Morning light slipped quietly through the thin curtains, painting the little house in gold. The radio murmured in the kitchen, and the smell of pancakes drifted through the air. Ethan stirred awake, his hair a soft halo against the pillow. From the doorway, Miss Clara watched him stretch and yawn, a tiny smile on his face. Every time he woke peacefully, her heart whispered thank you to a heaven that had once felt far away. Life had found its rhythm again. Ethan went to school now, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders, his laughter echoing through the street. The neighbors waved when they saw them pass. The florist left daisies on the porch, and even the stray cats lingered in the garden, as if the warmth of that home belonged to them too. On quiet evenings, Clara would sit by the window and watch the boy she had saved, the boy who had saved her. Sometimes she still thought about the park, the lonely bench, the frost, the tiny voice whispering to the sky. But the memory no longer hurt. It had turned into something sacred, a reminder that even the coldest places can become the roots of love. Each night before bed, Ethan still looked up at the stars. "Good night, Mom," he would whisper softly. "Thank you for watching me and for sending her." Then he'd crawl under his blanket, safe and smiling. Miss Clara would listen from the hallway, her eyes wet but peaceful. She knew that love, once planted, never dies. It just grows where it's needed most. And if you ever walk through a park in Chicago and see a small bench with bright marigolds blooming beside it, know that once a little boy sat there and waited for heaven to notice him. It did. It came to him wearing an old wool sweater, smelling of earth and hope, and it stayed. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to Tears of an Abandoned Child, give it a like, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Because every time a story like this is shared, another child out there learns that love still finds the lost, and that second chances are real.